I have here in my hand the LG G5, and this robot-faced Mamma Jamma is easily one of the most confusing devices I've ever had the opportunity to review, phone or otherwise, really. It's a flagship, yes, but only really by name. 820 processor, which is super fast, and that's definitely flagship quality, but the software is pretty bad. Then on the back, the camera optics, those are great too, and the software is pretty good to boot. That's also flagship quality. But the build, it's atrocious. I don't know what they're talking about that it's metal because it feels like plastic. We'll get into a lot more of that because we're going to talk about the build first, but overall, this thing is just a confusing pile of device. When I look at this device, I have to treat it like a flagship, right? It's LG's flagship device and it costs flagship money. So when you compare it to other flagships, it just doesn't feel as good in the hand. I'm no Samsung shill, but the S7 feels a billion times better than this thing does. There has been a ton of marketing hoopla from LG about what this thing is actually made of. Well, we have some answers. On the inside, it is indeed metal. Not terribly thick, not terribly heavy duty, because it's covered with a pretty thick layer of epoxy and then painted on top of. And LG says that that micronized aluminum paint that you're feeling underneath your fingers is why you're actually touching metal. I don't know about you guys, but that sounds like a whole lot of bullshit to me. It just doesn't feel good in the hand. It feels like I'm touching plastic. When you tap on it, it sounds like plastic. It feels cheap, it feels light, there's no heft, it doesn't feel good. And that's to say nothing of the compromises made with respect to the build when it comes to this little number. Magic slot. It's like the V10 was supposed to be the G5, the actual flagship. It bears more resemblance to the G4, and it feels more like a flagship device than this experimental thing.
If you want to know just how bad the G5 feels in the hand, then you'll be happy to know that it is the very first recipient of the D brand seal of quality. And what that means is that the feel of the device in the hand is so poor that you're almost obligated to put a D brand skin on it. The one we've got here is just the very simple, nice, crisp and clean matte black for the G5. Looks nice and simple, and that's what I'm going for. And it feels much, much better in the hand once you put a skin on it. Plus, if you're looking for a little bit more grip, D-Brand has a bunch of different kinds of skins. You can go leather, you can go wood, you can go metal, you can go a grippy sort of true color material. They're great. So thank you guys so much, D-Brand, for supporting the channel and supporting the very illustrious D-Brand seal of quality.
All right, I think I've bragged on the build for long enough. Let's move on to some of the good things. Let's talk about the camera. The camera on the G5 is really good. That shouldn't come as too much of a surprise because the camera on the G4 from last year was also pretty good. We know LG can do camera optics, and they did it pretty well this time around. Does well in bright light like today, good color reproduction, no over sharpening like you might find on Samsung devices, but in low light, not quite as good. It definitely holds up, but it's not as good as you're gonna find on, for example, the 6P or the S7.
I was really hard on LG in terms of the build, but I really want to give credit where it's due. I really like the software that they've got here for the camera. It's easy to use, it's easy to parse what does what, the iconography is easy to understand, switching between the two lens setups is really easy and really fast, and there's a great little flicking gesture that you can use to switch from the front camera to the back. They did a wonderful job with the UI here, so bravo.
Does have slow motion video, but no 240 frames per second, but what it does have is something I think is even cooler. There's a second set of optics here. The first one has optical image stabilization, the second one does not because it's bigger. It's a giant angle lens that increases the field of view by an enormous amount. It's even bigger than what you can actually see out of your own two eyes, so the stuff that you capture in these images is just so much fun. Granted, it's only an 8 megapixel sensor on that camera setup, but that's what I want to see more of from LG. If they had done a lot more in terms of fun, little, innovative, quirky things on the G5 instead of some sort of a modular mess, we might be having a different conversation.
Performance on the G5 was one of those things I didn't really notice very much, and to me, that's a pretty good thing. If a processor can handle everything that I can throw at it, then we're in good shape. The G5 definitely holds up, though I will say I think LG is a little bit easier on the thermal throttling side because this thing gets pretty warm when you're really making it crank. Whether it's big downloads, lots of animations, games, you name it, I didn't have any problems with the processor under the hood. The display, on the other hand, is a different story entirely. We're looking at a flagship device here, remember that. So when I look at other flagship devices and I see that there's only a few that don't have AMOLED displays yet, I get a little concerned. I know that AMOLED has its own problems that are objectively worse than an LCD display, but at this point, I think that we can all agree that color reproduction, contrast, and especially the ability to be able to turn on certain pixels at a time for the sake of the battery, they're all better on an AMOLED display. Not to mention, direct daylight performance is outright bad. When you're in direct sunlight, the display tries to accommodate for that by blasting the brightness and burning through your battery. But what they don't really seem to care about is the fact that LCD displays don't handle that kind of color shift well at all. What's even worse is how unresponsive the display seems to be when the lighting scene changes. Once you're done outside and head back in, it takes a surprisingly long time for that brightness to come back down and you're left looking at some really, really nasty representations of color. That's not to say that the display is bad, it's actually really good by LCD standards. It's just not what I'm looking for in a flagship. I really, really hope that by the time 2017 rolls around, we're not still having a conversation about whether or not flagship devices have AMOLED displays. Battery life on the G5 was fine overall. It's got a removable battery, so if you're into that, you can swap it out as soon as it dies, but don't expect to make it through more than one full day at a time. You're going to be charging it every night. Battery management was a little bit weird though. It sips juice at a pretty conservative rate on the daily, but every once in a while, it'll inexplicably start guzzling power, which leads to some really surprising encounters with your status bar, where you expect to see 50% or so left, and you find that you have closer to 20. Overall though, the battery life was perfectly serviceable with an average of 3 hours of screen on time and over 11 hours of uptime in standby. Or you could just go ahead and pick up one of those Cam Plus modules if you want to spend $70 for a few hundred extra milliamp hours. That's what LG thinks you're going to do with their friends.
Someone on the product team at LG needs to have a stern talking to, because the notion that any third-party retailers would ever take the time to make a device for a device of this nature is ludicrous to me. Not only did LG only put 2 friends out at launch, but one of those 2 friends, the Bang & Olufsen DAC, doesn't even work on the US devices, which means the only thing that we've got to add on to our G5s is that camera grip. All that camera grip gives you is a little bit of extra battery and some buttons and jog wheels for your camera. It doesn't do anything else, and it feels cheap in and of itself. It's a piece of plastic that you plug into the phone. Why that couldn't be done with a case or some other kind of third-party attachment, I have no idea. But if they really wanted to do something cool, there were more than enough avenues that they could have taken to do that. A game controller would have been incredible on a device like this. There are any number of opportunities that LG had to make this a cool feature, and they didn't. Overall, the G5 offers an experience that is well below average when it comes to the flagship line of phones for this year. The S7 is better in almost every way. Having held the HTC 10, I can tell you that one feels better in the hand too. I just don't have high hopes that this is going to look any better over the next few months than any of the other flagship offerings from the major OEMs. And if LG is expecting to make friends a big thing, then they need to tell us why it's going to matter past this year. As far as I'm aware, this is the only time that friends are going to matter. After this year, if no one's making any more friends because no one's buying this device anymore, what are you gonna do? Are you gonna make every other device at LG use the same magic slot and force yourself to back yourself into a corner in terms of designing new devices? I sure hope not. Which means any other magic slot accessories would have to be custom built for any other model. Do you see where I'm going with this? Yes, it feels kind of cool when you get it right. It feels, like they said, sort of like assembling a gun, but the fact that you have to pull the battery, that's huge. It's not hot swappable. The fact that this is so hard to get off without feeling like you're gonna break the device, not cool. The fact that the functionality that's offered from the other modules is just not good enough. I gotta reiterate, this really comes down to 2 major things: pricing and messaging from LG. LG's been very clear, this is their flagship device. They set the expectations, and unfortunately, they're just not meeting them. And that does also extend to a few more aspects of the device, especially the software. The software doesn't really have anything special going for it. They didn't add anything here. It doesn't feel like anything much other than being different for the sake of being different. The nav bar on the bottom starts as white for some reason. You have to change it to black manually. And then there's that major issue of no app drawer on their home screen, which means in order to get one back, which they did oblige, you have to go and download a separate home screen launcher from LG's own store. If that sounds a little convoluted, that's probably because it is. I realize that was kind of hard on the G5, and I don't want, like I said, I don't want you guys to think that I hate the device. I think that it's a decent device. It's a good device even. It's just not a flagship, and it's probably not gonna be for you. So I've got to give it a strong don't buy. It might make sense for those of you who are looking to spend $400, $500 on a phone, and maybe in the future when the price comes down to something closer to that range, it might make more sense, but as of right now, it just doesn't stack up. Thank you guys so much for watching my review of the G5. Let me know in the comments what you guys think. You can hit like if you enjoyed this video. You can hit subscribe if you want to see some more. And of course, I'm gonna go hang out with these kids on this playground now, I think. So thank you guys so much for watching. Be kind to one another, and I'll catch you in the next video.